Well, operations are always interesting to read about, but crossing the Meghna, 1971 victory curtain raiser. This was an operation that deserves an introduction, which is way beyond what anything I could imagine. The Meghna heli bridge, codenamed Operation Cactus Lily, was a brilliant, masterminded aerial operation conducted by the Indian Air Force and the Indian Army on the 9th of December 1971. It is said, if any one victory in the battle were to be rated as the greatest victory in history of warfare, ever since man started recording history, then the criteria for judging it must be based on the following parameters: the final outcome of the victory in battle, comparative strength of the opposing forces, losses in men and material, time interval between conception, planning, execution, and victory. If the above factors and Winston Churchill's quote are to be considered, then the crossing on the 9th of December 1971 of the mighty Meghna by the Indian Army and the Indian Air Force has to rank as one of the greatest and the most brilliant feat of arms by any army and air force in the world since the dawn of history. No other single victory in battle has had more profound an effect on history of nations and mankind than this battle. In one swift masterstroke of brilliant conception, planning, and execution, that from the beginning to the end of the war was over in a day. A small force of a few hundred brave soldiers, 12 helicopters, and their valiant crew created history. A bold and daring heliborne operation where troops of General Sagat's 4th Corps were airlifted by the Indian Air Force across the 400-yard wide River Meghna, which enabled the capture of Dhaka and the consequent surrender of the Pakistan Army in East Pakistan. This victory in a single operation helped create a new nation, Bangladesh.
To discuss this topic and on the panel are Lieutenant General Gurbaksh Singh Sihota. He was commissioned into the Regiment of the Artillery and is a recipient of the Silver Gun and the Silver Oyster. Living up to his reputation, he went on to be a highly decorated gunner with Param Vishisht Seva Medal, Ati Vishisht Seva Medal, and Bir Chakra, a Vayu Sena Medal, and mentioned in dispatches. He is an aviator and had served with the Air Peace Squadron during the 1971 operations in Bangladesh, where he earned his Bir Chakra. He has attended the Defense Services Staff College, Camberley, UK, and NBC course in the USA. He is also an alumnus of the National Defense College, New Delhi. After commanding an independent infantry brigade in the Western Sector, he was General Officer commanding of Victor Force in counterinsurgency situations in Jammu and Kashmir. As Lieutenant General, he commanded a strike corps in Western Sector. Before taking over as GOC&C Southern Command, he was the Director General of Military Operations at Army Headquarters.
Major Chandrakant Singh VR. Major Chandrakant Singh was commissioned in the 4th Battalion, the Brigade of Guards. His first posting after a short tenure in Sikkim was with the UN force in Gaza. He took an active part in the CI Ops in Mizo Hills, including an operation of Pakistan in 1970. In 1971 war, he took part in the heliborne ops to cross the Meghna River on 9th of December. He was wounded in both legs on 11th December at Nasinguri and was awarded the Veer Chakra. He took premature retirement in 1977. He is now involved in writing accounts and books on war, environmental, and defense related issues. He is an author of the biography of AVM Chandan Singh, MVC, AVSM, VRC, titled Cavalier in the Sky. He is currently writing a book on the Meghna crossing titled Flight to Victory.
Squadron leader R.T.S. Chinna served in the Indian Air Force as a helicopter pilot and is a qualified flying instructor. He saw active service on the Siachen Glacier and with the IPKF in Sri Lanka, as well as in counterinsurgency operations in India's northeast and Jammu and Kashmir. He is the recipient of the McGregor Medal for Best Military Reconnaissance in 1986. He is currently secretary and editor of the United Service Institution of India Center for Military History and Conflict Research. He is also the Vice President of the Indian Military Historical Society, UK. He was responsible for spearheading the joint USI-MEA India and the Great War Centenary Commemoration Project. The author of a number of books, he was a member of the IAF Aerospace Museum Apex Steering Committee and the Government of India's Archival Advisory Board. He is on the editorial advisory board of the Journal of the British Commission for Military History. He was appointed an honorary member of the Order of the British Empire in 2016 and an officer of the Belgian Order of Leopold in 2018 for his contribution towards strengthening the Indo-UK and Indo-Belgian bilateral ties respectively.
Group Captain C.S. Sandhu, Veer Chakra. Group Captain C.S. Sandhu was commissioned in the Air Force in the fighter stream in 1958 and participated in the liberation of Goa operations. Switched to helicopters in 1962 and participated actively in Rajasthan sector during the 1965 war. He took over as the commanding officer of a helicopter unit in 1971, which participated in the war in the East Pakistan and was responsible for the famous heli lift across the Meghna River by night and day. He personally led a special heliborne operation deep behind enemy positions. His citation reads, "Throughout, squadron leader Charanjit Singh Sandhu displayed gallantry, professional skill, and leadership of highest order." He was awarded the VRC. Later, the unit was presented the President's Colors, which was presented to the units for exceptional performance. In 1984, he was the CO of the helicopter unit, which airlifted troops to Siachen, landing in the snow at heights close to 20,000 feet. He was awarded the Vayu Sena Medal for dedication and leadership of the highest order.
Lieutenant General S.S. Mehta, PVSM, AVSM and BAR, VSM, a highly decorated cavalry officer who has put in 41 years of service before hanging up his uniform in January 2004. He was commissioned into the 63rd Cavalry in December 1962. General Mehta has a rich command, staff, and instructional experience. He led an independent armored squadron in operations during the 1971 war with Pakistan, where he was mentioned in dispatches. He has commanded an armored division and a strike corps in the western sector. His other important assignments include GOC&C of the Army Training Command Shimla, Deputy Chief of Army Staff Planning and Systems at Army Headquarters, and member of the National Security Advisory Board. General Mehta has been an instructor at the Higher Command Wing of the Army War College, Mao, the Intelligence School, School of Arts and Defense Services, Staff College. He attended the Nuclear, Biological, and Chemical Defense course at Timoshenko Academy in Moscow and the United States Army War College course.
Over to you, sir.
May I start? Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to what promises to be a truly historic session. We have, and that's actually more ways than one, given that we are meeting in the ether rather than in person. We have four very eminent and distinguished panelists who will not just talk to us about history from an armchair perspective, but from that of a lived experience. And it's not often that we are fortunate enough to be in the august company of individuals whose actions have actually helped to shape the destiny of not just one, but three nations, that is that of India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh. Before I commence, I'd just like to mention over here that this particular session is dedicated in part to the United Service Institution of India, or the USI, which is celebrating its 150th anniversary of raising this year. And I'm grateful to the organizers for allowing me to say a few words about it. As many of you will be aware, this unique institution is one of the oldest military think tanks in the world, and certainly the oldest in Asia. It came into being in Shimla, in the erstwhile summer capital of British India, in 1870, and it aims to further interest and knowledge in the arts, science, and literature of national security in general, and the defense services in particular. The USI was the creation of the then Quartermaster General, or QMG, of India, Colonel Charles McGregor. And the USI Library, when it was raised, it served in its early years as a kind of a back office for the intelligence branch of Army headquarters, which was then located at Shimla. And the reason for this, of course, was that military intelligence in those days was a function of the QMG, and McGregor was responsible for laying its foundations in this country. The USI prides itself on having one of the oldest military journals in continuous print anywhere in the world, barring perhaps the journal of the RUSI in London. And the institution moved to Kashmir House in Delhi in 1953, where it was nursed through the critical decades after independence by the exceptional efforts of Colonel Pyarelal, who served as the secretary of the institution for 3 decades, from 1957 to 1987. And it has since been served by a number of equally dedicated and distinguished individuals who have guided it from strength to strength, including Major General Amir Sinha, Lieutenant General Satish Nambiar, Lieutenant General P.K. Singh, and the current director, of course, is Major General B.K. Sharma. Apart from the USI Journal, the USI boasts of one of the finest military libraries in the country, with holdings dating back to the 18th century. And it's an invaluable resource for scholars of Indian military history, or indeed for anyone interested in any aspects of the history, organization, and ethos of the Indian Armed Forces. The other branches within the USI are a courses section, a Center for Strategic Studies of Simulation, which is CS3, and the Center for Military History and Conflict Research, which I look after. And all of these continue to contribute immensely to the professional development of the Indian Armed Forces, and to allow the USI to play as significant a role in the intellectual life of the Indian military establishment today, as it has done over the past 150 years.
At least my portion.
Now, to return to our main session, as you will be aware, and as was mentioned in the preceding section, that next December will mark the golden jubilee of the 1971 war. And today's session is, in effect, a curtain raiser for a year-long commemorations of the 71 conflict that the USI and the Military Literature Festival will be undertaking jointly. And as such, we are going to begin with a discussion of a very significant and unique action, the crossing of the river Meghna during the Bangladesh Liberation War in December 1971. May I have the slide, please? And hopefully they'll come up with a slide where, normally when we talk of a river, we have a notion of the Yamuna or of European rivers as one sees them today. And may I have the slide, please? May I request the organizers to put up the slide? Well, anyhow, the intent or the depiction on the slide is that of, it shows a couple of European rivers, the Seine and the Rhine, and the average width of those is anything between 100 to 400 meters. Whereas when we talk of the river Meghna, at points we find that its width varies between 5 to 15 kilometers. So it's a veritable ocean rather than a river in the conventional sense in certain places. And if you keep that in mind, it just brings to life and gives us a sense of the obstacle that faced the advancing Indian forces and of the audacity and tactical genius of the Indian commanders. It also highlights the valor, the grit, and the determination of the officers and men who took part in a plan that was so daring and unbelievable that it caught the enemy completely by surprise and led to the prize of Dhaka falling to the relentless Indian advance before international pressure could be brought to bear on to bring the operations to a premature close. Our 4 panelists were active participants in these historic operations and will now share with us their experiences of this key battle that unlocked the door to the prize of Dhaka. Due to a paucity of time, I mean, the CVs have already been read out, thankfully, so I won't repeat that. I'll request each speaker to kindly try and limit his talk to 18 minutes, which will leave us approximately 10 minutes for audience interaction towards the end. Our first speaker, I'd invite Lieutenant General G.S. Sihota. During the operations, General Sihota was an air OP pilot, and he was often in close contact with General Sagat Singh, the Corps commander of 4 Corps. And I'll request him to tell us a little bit about General Sagat, his role as an outstanding military commander, his leadership in his planning for the battle, and along with his own personal experiences of the battle. Over to you, sir.
Thank you. Good afternoon. The story of Meghna crossing will be incomplete without discussing the commander who conceived that plan and executed with the strong conviction of his success, that is General Sagat Singh, GOC 4 Corps. I was fortunate to fly him during this war and learn a lot from him. Due to paucity of time, I will divide my talk in 2 parts. First, I'll just discuss about the style of command of General Sagat Singh, because that's what will bring home some lessons for the future commanders. And in the second part, I'll give you my experience in carrying out these operations along with the Air Force. And the lessons of this will be useful because no such operation has taken place ever after that. Firstly, about General Sagat Singh. At that time, I wasn't a complete greenhorn, having taken part in 1965 war with the crack battalion of the Indian Army, 1st Sikh, as their FO, and also having flown for a few months in the Western sector and flying very senior commanders. But after reaching 4 Corps, we realized that it was a completely different ballgame. Our first impression of General Sagat Singh came about when we flew him to Kamalpur, where the Battle of Dhalai was taking place. Here, we realized that this commander was not willing to accept defeat. There were very heavy casualties. The battle had gone on for a number of days, and it was the first battle of the Corps, and he was wanting to succeed. But his other commanders were recommending that they should call off the operation. He insisted, and we saw that even the brave commander got injured. There was a change of command, but General Sagat, despite all the heavy casualties, succeeded. It sent the right message to the Corps that Corps commander is never going to accept defeat or no to his orders. After that, we flew him almost every day, visiting the front. In fact, it started after one of the missions when we returned that Agartala airfield, which was operative for quite some time, had switched off their lights, and we had to land back at Taliamora on a dusty helipad with the jeep's lights. We were a little concerned about it, but we did not find any discomfort with the Corps commander. From that day onwards, every day, Corps commander would arrive early morning, give us a brief about his visits. We'll take off and land back only at the last light or after that. During this period, he would visit the front and discuss and plan or give his orders to all his commanders.
ये
He
shoulder
was a
नीचे है
risk
ये
taker. And we as Aerope pilots, who actually, having been part of the Indian Air Force, had certain safety rules to be followed. But it was his risk-taking which rubbed on us. And we too then, after that, did so many things which actually hadn't been done before. I will cite a few examples to you during this period. Once, in the Battle of Akora, he realized that the battle was not progressing as he had planned. He decided to look at the enemy's defenses from the rear. I was a bit reluctant, but I couldn't say no to him. As we approached the rear of those defenses, we found that the Pakistanis were moving away along the railway line and vacating the post. Now, there was no way we could communicate to the troops who were to capture their position, so we spotted them and landed. We found Major D.P. Singh, then the company commander, later General D.P. Singh, who was in Chandigarh itself, coming out and meeting us. And he was provided this information, and Akora was captured in no time. Another incident I would like to point out was Brigadier Tom Pandey's brigade was moving along Mainamati axis. He was to meet us at a helipad, and we waited for him for quite some time. General Sagat, by this time, had started. While we were waiting, he would discuss many things with us. He would discuss his plans, he will discuss personalities, he will share his thoughts. We waited for a long time, but when he didn't turn up, I offered that if I could go up along the moving convoy and locate him. But he decided that he must accompany us. If we could take a risk, so could he. We went and landed next to some jeeps, and there it was, Brigadier Pandey. And while briefing the corps commander, he mentioned that he couldn't cross the channel because there was no crossing expedients. And the corps commander looked at me, and I knew what he wanted. I quickly took off, flew along the channel, and a few kilometers away, noticed a boat, a civilian boat, and came and informed about it, told the brigade commander, and came away. He also had another trait in which, if he felt that the information being given to him may not be correct, he would land up there. This was in Karimganj. We flew him there, and we found that he had gone to the position and asked 2 bodies to be exhumed because he wasn't sure that the information given to him about this unit killing 2 officers was correct. So that is the kind of command he had, and he led from the front. Another incident was very interesting, that we had visited General Hira's division, and by the time General Arora had come and we were flying him around Komila, and we noticed our own troops on the Komila airfield. And we just mentioned to him that, I think, sir, our boys are reached there. So he said, why can't we land? And I just told him that looks that the airfield is mined. And I don't know in what manner, he told me, but we can always put 3 wheels away from the minefields. And there, foolishly, I quickly put it down, but before I could switch it off, there was a fence, and the civilians came over the fence and started running towards the helicopter, and a mine blew up. I quickly took off. So that is the kind of risks he was taking, and he was bold and brave. In fact, I will put him a field commander of the level of, say, Rommel, Patton, Guderian, because hardly any Indian field commanders would have reached that level. Due to shortage of time, I think I'll switch to the crossing of Meghna. 9th of December was a significant day for me also, as well as for the operations in Bangladesh. I was called late at night on the 8th that I was to go and carry out reconnaissance for a heli landing site, and in the evening guide the Mi-4 helicopters and lead them to the site. I reported to 57 Infantry Division for briefing at Brahmanabari. And there I found GOC General Gonsalves, Brigadier Mishra, who was the brigade commander, and Colonel Himmat Singh, who was the CEO of 4 guards, waiting at the helipad. And they were busy discussing their own plans and thoughts. They forgot to brief me. But from my own experience and assuming from their conversation, I knew that they were coming with me for the reconnaissance. Just before they got into the helicopter, a bit of a tussle took place, in which General Gonsalves told Brigadier Mishra that he should sit in front so that he can carry out reconnaissance of the landing site. But Brigadier Mishra insisted that he being senior, he should sit in front. That was providential, because when later we were fired upon and hit, the bullets flew over close to Brigadier Mishra's head. Had it been tall general sitting there, the story would have been different. Anyway, we took off. We, as already mentioned, this mighty river, so formidable, you cannot understand the vastness of it unless you fly over it. We crossed it. As we were on the other side, and I was looking for a suitable landing site, the others were busy looking at the enemy's dispositions. We were fired upon by the machine gun, but we were out of their effective range. Soon, the 3 of them started pointing out the dispositions of the gun position and the troops, and we saw that the bridge over Meghna on our right had been blown up. That was a matter of concern for them, and the whole thing got diverted towards the bridge, and they asked us, and I had Captain Dhava with me, who was flying with me, and while I was doing the recce, he was quickly told to fly off towards the bridge. As we reached the other side of the bridge, we noticed that our troops were moving along the riverbed with speed, and there were some tanks, and they were trying to get onto the tanks. And they realized that probably one of battalions which had gone to capture that site had an adverse situation. That once again put them off, and we started doing reconnaissance of the area and finding out more details about this action. As we were flying along the railway line, I had by that time lost altitude and come down to 400 to 500 feet, and we were fired upon, and a few bursts went through the helicopter, but fortunately none of the vital parts were damaged, and we quickly landed back at Brahmanbaria. All 3 of them, without saying anything to me, left for the ops room, and I was there waiting and planning as to what should be my next action. As I was doing that, a casualty came about, and I was asked by the JCO to evacuate him. So I said, okay, there is time. So I went for the evacuation, went back to Agartala, and luckily saw General Sagat Singh standing there. Now I was keen to show him the state of my helicopter, but when I reached close to his helicopter, he showed me the state of his helicopter, and which was full of blood. The co-pilot of the helicopter had been injured. Luckily, he survived. And the co-commander himself had some kind of splinter which has grazed his forehead. I didn't want to then show my helicopter to him, but he was very crisp and told me, now get going, go and select the heli landing site and be ready to guide them. So I took off. As now we were a little more careful, and while crossing Meghna at a very low level, we saw a number of fishing boats lying in that area. As we crossed and flew over one of them, suddenly the tarpaulin was removed and the guns started firing at us. We realized it was not a fishing boat, but a gunboat. We had to again come back, select another route, go for the recce, and finish our tasks by the time it was late in the evening. As I landed back at Brahmanbaria, the Mi-4 were being loaded with the troops. It was getting dark, so I was quickly told without further briefing, which I think Group Captain Sandhu will subsequently cover, that let's take off. And we took off. As we had climbed off to 500 to 1,000 feet, I was informed on the RT that they couldn't locate me. And I suddenly realized that we hadn't done any coordination and planning, and we were flying at different altitudes. So I quickly climbed up till they located me. And as soon as we crossed the river, I realized that the landmarks which had been selected by me were not visible. At night, I couldn't locate any of them. So what to do? There was a quick decision I had to take. So I saw on the bank, there was a big sandy patch, and I thought that could be the best place to land. I went there, hovered, indicated to the leading helicopter, and flew off. That night, I was restless because I knew that in case I had selected a wrong site and the operation was unsuccessful, what will happen to me? But in the morning when I went to the Corps headquarters, the first thing I heard was, "Congratulations, son, shabash." So that was the operation. I would say that the biggest lesson here is that whatever the plans be, in its execution, it will always be so different, and there will be requirement of taking quick decisions and with the presence of mind. Thank you.
Thank you very much, General, for that fascinating account of your experiences and of General Sagat as one of India's outstanding military commanders. One only wishes that there was more time that we could listen to some of these talks for hours on end. Our next speaker is Major Chandrakant Singh, and he was involved in the events in the run-up to the Liberation War from April 71 to July 72, as was mentioned in the introduction. But during the war, he took part in the heli-borne operations to cross the Meghna on the 9th December. And he was wounded in both legs on 11th December at Narsingdi and awarded a Veer Chakra for gallantry in action. And Sir, having taken part in the crucial Battle of Akora, which actually broke the enemy's back, it would be useful if you could kindly cover the ground aspects of the battle from the point of an infantry officer. Over to you, sir.
Firstly, I have to thank the Honorable, His Excellency the Governor, Rao Sahib VP Singh Badnor, His Highness the Mahaja Patiala, the Chief Minister, and my friend General Shergill, and Mandeep Bajwa and you, Squadron Chinna, for conceiving and implementing this wonderful exhibition, the Military Literature Festival, the only type in India and perhaps in the world. And hopefully from next year, you'll be able to take it to other parts of the country so that our population, general public, which is so unaware of our own history, gets to aware of our past. Because a nation that forgets its past has no future. Sorry, there's something buzzing going on. The other thing I have to thank you all for is, here there are four of us, General Sihota, Group Captain Sandhu, and General Shammi Mehta, myself. All of us were contemporaries at NDA and brothers and comrades in arms during the war and on that fateful day, 9th of December. Thank you very much. A river crossing in anywhere in the world has several parts. You mentioned Akora. Akora was the battle that was to break the outer crust of defenses of the Pakistan army, which we succeeded. It was the toughest battle in the eastern sector. It was the only divisional sized battle in which two brigades of ours, of 57 Div, took part. General Shammi Mehta was there with his tanks. General Sihota, of course, was flying around and landed in Akora. The battle lasted all of 4 days. It started on the first night when my battalion infiltrated through, got behind the Pakistani lines. We suffered a lot of casualties in that battle, particularly my battalion. Platoon of my company, which was overrun by Pakistani tanks. But by the 5th, we had captured Akora. And in the capture, Shammi's squadron also captured 2 PT-76 tanks, or was it 3, which we didn't know that the Pakistan army had. Later on, it transpired that these tanks were perhaps the tanks which 7th Cavalry of ours had lost in the 65 war. Yeah, but I'm not too certain about that. From the 6th onwards, our advance to the river line started off. That we had broken the outer shell, achieved a lodgement in the enemy territory, and then the advance to the river line. This happened from 6th and 7th and the 8th. Now, from the 6th onwards, actually, for the next 3 days, my company rode on General Shammi's tanks. You know, after having had to walk for miles and miles and miles, unending day and night, to ride on top of his PT-76 tanks was like riding a Rolls Royce. We took part in a couple of, I would call them skirmishes, clearing of the areas. But the most interesting part was when we entered the divisional headquarters and the brigade headquarters of the Pakistani 14 Division and 27 Div at Brahman Baria. General Sagat Singh himself mentioned, and I think General Sihota would vouch for that the command post of the division was built as if it was designed to withstand a nuclear strike. That was the level of the defenses there. But fortunately, they abandoned it, Brahman Barrier, without giving us time. We had some problems crossing that destroyed the bridge. There's a river, a small river with an odd name called Pagla River. We had a problem crossing the river because the bridge had been blown up. We couldn't find enough country boats. Shammi's tanks could, of course, float across, but the problem with those 2 Pakistani tanks was that their flotation system didn't work. So it took us a couple of hours to overcome this problem and get across the thing. Cleared Brahman Baria, there's nothing very much there. But the sad part is, in the division headquarters itself, we found the bodies of 6 of our men from 10 Bihar with their hands tied behind their backs and shot behind their heads. And Group Captain Sandhu would recall there were 66 bodies of Bengalis in a similar condition with their hands tied behind their backs and shot in the back. General Gonzalez, incidentally, the first person to enter Brahmanbaria was not me or any of our troops. It was General Gonzalez who landed there. And he discovered that the Pakistanis had abandoned Brahmanbaria. At that moment, General Gonzalez said that he was going to have, when the war got over, and if General Abdul Majid, the GOC of 14th Pakistani Infantry Division, was captured, he would have him court-martialed, but nothing happened. That's a different story. Now our advance to secure the bridge at Bhairab Bazaar, which is the only bridge on the Meghna River in those days, started. I was riding on tanks. We cleared a few positions. In one place, we got fired upon by a Pakistan anti-tank gun. Well, we were still sitting on his tank. He told me, Chandrakant, jump off. Jumped off with my men. We charged the position, captured the RCL gun. And by the evening, we had secured a place called Tala Sheher, from where we could see the bridge and the sky. And next, unfortunately, because we were not, at that time, our artillery hadn't caught up, so there was no question of advancing further and trying to get involved in street fighting, which would have been a thing. But in the evening, we got a message that our CO had to report back to Brahmanbaria early morning. We didn't know what for. He told me, Ponchi, you're the next senior most. There was no second command posted. I was the company commander. You take charge and wait till I get back. He left early in the morning, I think at 4:30 for Brahmanbaria. And at 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock, I get a message from him, get the battalion back to Brahmanbaria. I said, sir, whom do I hand over our positions to? Because we were in contact with the enemy and exchanging fire. He says, don't worry about that. Shami's tanks will be there, and 18 Rajputs and 10 Bihar are advancing. And they will take over our position. And on our flanks is 73 Brigade under Brigadier Kumi. So this is on the 9th morning. So I went back with the battalion. And here at Tala Sheher and Ashuganj, the 9th of December did not go very well for us. We suffered a lot of casualties, particularly Shami lost a couple of tanks. 18 Rajputs had over 100 casualties. So did 10 Bihar. But this is what will happen in the in war. It's only at about 2 o'clock when I landed up at the Brahmanbaria Stadium, and my CO, Colonel Himmat Singh, met me. And he told me, Chandrakant, we are crossing the Meghna, and General Sagat was in his jeep in one corner of the stadium, and so were the brigade commander and others. And somebody came with a pile of maps, handed the maps over to us, because so far our thing was that we would actually not even advance to the river line. We were supposed to go after capture of Akora to Chittagong. And here we were given maps which covered an area from the Meghna River right up to Dhaka. I said, my God, where the hell are we going? And I told my CO, I said, sir, I hope Sagat doesn't expect us to swim across the Meghna. It is 16 kilometers wide in that area. Several islands in between, but he says, no, we're getting helicopters. And that's the first time I heard that we're going to get helicopters, and they're going to arrive in a couple of hours, and Sandhu and his boys are going to land up there. Now, that is the time when we were preparing our loads. These Mi-4 helicopters we knew could carry 10 to 11 troops with the equipment. But we had a lot of porters, we had extra ammunition. That the casualties of 10 Bihar and 18 Rajputs started coming to the stadium. And they were in their hundreds. So here we were going off into an unknown land in a new operation, an area where we had not carried out any reconnaissance. And here were the casualties. I would say that it wasn't demoralizing, but it was certainly disturbing. However, that is another story. At about 4 o'clock, a flight of helicopters, I think 4 at a time, Group Captain Sandhu would landed there. And I think the pilot was, Group Captain Sandhu would say, I think the first one was, I think, pushed well, or was it you? One of the two. And the first helicopter that we got in, my CEO and myself, my men, and here the helicopters, instead of carrying 10 men, they were carrying about 18 to 19 people, about 12 to 13 of our men with the ammunition. And each helicopter also had 5 or 6 local Bengalis who were acting as porters, carrying our extra first-line ammunition and other equipment. But fortunately, because the stadium had a bit of open ground, the aircraft, the Mi-4s could do a little bit of a 100-meter takeoff run. So they could, gain speed and acquire lift. The first flight of 4 helicopters left at 4 o'clock. I think it was 4:30, and the east starts getting dark. It was getting dark, and the sun was about to set in the west. When we took off, the rear boom doors of the helicopters had been removed. And there we were up in the air with 1 foot, because opposite me was sitting my CEO, Colonel Himmat, his left foot dangling down, my right foot dangling down outside the helicopter, with the other hand holding on to dear life. And in one corner of the helicopter was the senior Air Force officer in the area, Group Captain Sardar Singh, sitting. The flight was perhaps, I think, 15 minutes or 20 minutes at most. But, and then at that very moment, when we were over the river, 2 Nats fighters of ours came to escort us. And, that was a bit of a morale booster, because they said in case there's a bit of opposition, they could neutralize that. We landed at Raipura. Accompanying us was flying officer Shahid. And he had those goose neck lamps. So the moment we landed, Shahid, the CEO, told Shahid to start marking the landing ground. And he told me, just take your radio operator and 2 other men and carry out a reconnaissance of Meghna railway station, which is just about 2 kilometers away, to see if the Pakistanis are there. There were some reports that they were there. And the place we landed, fortunately, was about 12 kilometers south of Bhairab Bazaar, where the whole of 14 Div and 27 Infantry Brigade of the Pakistanis was there. We were slightly outside the artillery range. I think that is the place that General Sagat selected, because outside the artillery range, and we had crossed the river at its widest point. So it was least expected that we would land up at Raipura. The landing, of course, went like mechanically clockwork. Not a hitch, no casualties, nothing went wrong. It was completed by 4 o'clock in the morning. But the moment I landed up, I was told to go off with this reconnaissance party to that railway station where the Pakistanis were. And so we tried to move stealthily. It was getting dark. But the locals, hearing and seeing the helicopters land, rushed, came, men, women, children came out. And what we were trying to approach, stealthily, turned out into a Bengali mob carrying me, my radio operator, and 2 other men on their shoulders. The Pakistanis hearing us come, and the Bengalis can be loud under normal circumstances, but when you have 2,000 jubilant Bengalis, the roar can be heard miles away. The Pakistanis abandoned their position at Meghna. There were a whole company of them, paramilitary troops, not regular troops. And when they landed up there, I could actually see them at a distance. They had loaded their luggage into a wagon, collected some locals, and they're pushing the wagons and going southwards towards Narsingdi. So I heaved a sigh of relief. And then I was waiting for my company to come and link up. What should have taken them 45 minutes, 1 hour passed, 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours, 5 hours passed. They came and joined me at about 3 o'clock in the morning or 4 o'clock in the morning. when we asked, there was a young officer, because his company commander had got wounded at Akora, and he had taken over the company. So young Surinder had taken over the company, and as they say in the army, where there's nothing more dangerous than a second lieutenant with a map. Sure enough, he got lost, and instead of joining me, which is just 2 barely kilometers away from our landing ground, he took a local guide and he turned northwards and hit the Pakistani defenses at Bhairab Bazar. The main defenses. The Pakistanis shelled fire at his troop, which included my company, both shelling and firing. I lost 6 men from my company. He also had some things. It had a negative effect on that, but there was a positive outcome. The Pakistanis thought that we had crossed over and our aim was to attack them. So the same heroic general who had killed 6 of our men from 10 Bihar in his command post, here from the 9th onwards till the 17th of December, he and his division were holed up. They did not venture out. Later on, 19th Punjab crossed over, the 19th Punjab, and a battalion of the East Bengal Regiment crossed over. They contained the whole of this division. Eventually, when they surrendered, we found that there were 6,000 troops who were in Bhairab Bazar. For that 1 week, they did not venture out. So sometimes a mishap actually turns into an advantage. The next couple of days, we advanced in the way I got wounded and things like that. But the heli lift continued. It continued on the 10th, there was a bit of a break. On the 11th, the next heli lift took place at Narsingi when 2 battalions and some elements of the artillery crossed over. Now, it is interesting here. And just today, I received a message from an Air Force officer. He was in charge of the helicopter maintenance there, that Air Chief Marshal Lal, in an address after the war at the Air Force Station Bidar, mentioned that when he was told about this heli-borne operation and its success, disbelieved it. When he was told that so many troops had crossed over and so many tons of ammunition, he said, I first disbelieved it, so I had to get a reconfirmation. Now here I would like to sort of take a little thing to read out something. Here were Group Captain Sandhu's boys, 10 of 10 helicopters, another 2 or 3 or 4 from 2 other squadrons, 104, Nanda Kayapa was I think 104, and 105 and 110. Sagat Singh had been given permission, he says, sorry, Sagat, yeah. I had it in mind that I could possibly use helicopters in an offensive task. Now here, I'm sorry, I'll go back. I remember Group Captain Sandhu telling me once that on the 19th of September, when he first met General Sagat at Tiliamura, Sagat had told him that train your boys for night landing and takeoff because I intend to use them. So Sagat, right in the beginning, was quite clear in his mind that he was going to use helicopters in an offensive role. This was not known to Headquarters Eastern Command, Army Eastern Command, or the Air Force Eastern Command, nor the Army Headquarters or Air Headquarters. And General Air Chief Marshal Lal admits that. I won't get into details. But Sagat was given. Eventually, a directive was issued that the Air Force only had a capability of lifting 1 company, and that I should submit plans for the helicopters to lift 1 company only. The point is, 1 company is 120 men. Here, these helicopters lifted a total of over 6,000 men. From the 9th to the 15th, we had a total of 3 brigades heli-lifted across the Meghna. 1 was ferried and 1 came by land. So on the 15th of December, when the ceasefire was implemented, there were 5 infantry brigades outside Dhaka. And the first ones were there. But we were infantry. We knew the Pakistanis had 2 squadrons of Shafi tanks in Dhaka. Our entire lot of artillery had not fetched up. 2 weeks earlier, at Akora, I had experienced Pakistani tanks churning up and chewing up an entire platoon of ours. So I knew what enemy tanks could do to infantry on the ground. We had limited anti-tank weapons. 106 guns were without their jeeps, so we could hardly move them around. They had to be man-packed, and each gun is about 500 kgs. The rocket launchers were World War II vintage, outdated. Then on the 14th, we heaved a sigh of relief. In the distance, we saw a column of tanks appearing. By then, we'd established contact with them. I don't know how Shammi got his tanks across, but somehow he managed to get his tanks across and link up with us. If he had not linked up with us in that time, and the Pakistanis had used their Shafi tanks, but fortunately we had a river obstacle, the Satya Lekha, between Dhaka and us there. It's in a sort of suburb of Dhaka. And by then we had controlled the ferry point. We would have met the same fate as the British Airborne Division, which was landed at Arnhem, and whose story has been told by The Bridge Too Far, both in movie and print. I would like to go back to Sagat a little bit. Not what Sagat said, but it's about Sagat and the thing. One thing that I forgot to mention is this operation started at 4 p.m. on the 9th of December. On the 10th of December, it was over on the 4th p.m. And at 10 a.m., it was over on the 10th of December at 4 a.m. At 10 a.m. was the first Pakistani feeler sent out to the United Nations seeking a ceasefire. For all practical purposes, the war for us was over. We had a few skirmishes, but there was no further fighting. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. The fascinating account. Once again, something that we can go on listening to for a long time. Our next speaker is Group Captain Sandhu. As Major Chandrakant pointed out, he was commanding officer of 110HU. Sir, you were involved in what was literally one of a pioneering or a groundbreaking role, and responsible for the famous heli lift over the river Meghna by night and day, for which you received the Veer Chakra. So I'd be grateful if you could kindly talk to us about the air aspects of the operations in general, and the special heliborne operations that you undertook in particular, and perhaps also very briefly touch upon the role of another outstanding commander, again with a Jodhpur link, Group Captain Chandan Singh. Over to you, sir.
Before I talk about the airlift itself, I would like to go back in time a little bit to let you know about the happenings prior to the incident. We had 10 Mi-4 helicopters on our strength. It was a very rugged helicopter that could take on any task and it will never let you down. And this was adequately proved during the operations. It performed exceptionally well. It was capable of airlifting 12 to 14 soldiers, depending on the fuel on board. It had an endurance of 2 hours, 30 minutes, and very limited night flying capability, just at the navigation lights and the cockpit lights. As far as night flight was concerned, we had no problem for operation at the base during that time because helicopters were allowed to operate only at daytime. Night operation was not allowed. However, limited training flight could be done with many restrictions. Unfortunately, I could not even do this because my airfield was surrounded by hills on three sides, and no night flying was permitted from flight safety point of view. We had to go to some other base, carry out night flying, and this was not always feasible. So hence my aircrew was certainly not trained enough to carry out this operation with that level of training. In June sometime, I was informed by my command that in event of war, I would be operating for the Fourth Corps, and I should go and meet General Sagat Singh, the Corps commander, and come to know about his requirement, which I had to fulfill completely. When I met him a few days later, he told me that he wanted us to airlift troops by night into the enemy area, and the flying time would be in the region of 20 minutes. And he didn't expect more than a company airlift at a time. And he also told me that I had to be ready as soon as possible. So I explained to him that we needed extensive training. And during the monsoon, that is July and August, I don't think we'll be able to do any night flying practice. So I could get ready only in the end of September or beginning of October. Unfortunately, because the night flying was not permitted at my base, I had to get to command several times and somehow convince them to allow me to carry out night flying at that place. And finally, the command did relent, and he allowed us with the provision that we must be very careful not to have any accidents. In September, we carried out complete training. Our plan was because it's a norm when you are going for a mission in the enemy area during a war, you have complete RT silence. At night, you don't use your navigation lights. So it was not possible for the helicopters to be in touch with each other, either visually or on RT. So they had to fly separately and independently. So we decided that we will go in line, one behind the other, spaced by time and distance. And it was important here that you maintain your speed with zero error, because slight change in speed, either you would go into the aircraft in front or you will lag behind onto the aircraft coming from behind. And this could have a telescopic effect while you are approaching and landing. And they could lead to an accident. So this was the main emphasis on during the night flying, that you had to maintain that speed for 2.5 hours. It required a lot of skill to do that, but ultimately I think we did achieve it. As far as navigation concerned, it in all probability it would be complete dark night over the enemy area, so the ground navigation was not possible. So we decided that we'll go purely on time and course set steering. Here too, the course had to be steered without any error, and time had to be maintained to reach your destination. So these are very exact figures, and we had to achieve it, which we did achieve ultimately. By end of October, I think we were all set for any task given to us. When the war started, we moved to 5 helicopters were moved to the Corps headquarters location at Teliamura, which is about 20 kilometers east of Agartala. The other helicopters had to be dispersed in Mizoram helipads because there was no space here, and they would be available on short call. On 7th of December, in the morning, I was told to go to Kalasha, pick up some troops and drop them at Selvat. It was a full battalion load, and I had to do it by evening. So before taking off, I requested the TAC. Now, TAC is an Air Force element which is attached to the Corps headquarters, and it coordinates the air effort with the Army and the Air Force. I told them to provision fuel there because I knew that to airlift a battalion we would need at least 40 to 50 sorties. And with the 10 helicopters there, we could do only 3 shuttles. That meant only 30 sorties. And I also requested them to kindly contact the helicopter that were dispersed in Mizoram so that they could come directly to Kalashar. Now, Kalashar is a small airfield. It did not have any facilities except it had a pistol and green and red cartridges to indicate to the aircraft whether he could land or take off. No refueling facilities were available there whatsoever. So when I landed at Kalashar, the Group Commander and Group Captain Chandra Singh were already waiting for me. We